Be Frank Network. Content on this production is for entertainment and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, nor is it intended to substitute medical treatment or diagnosis. Seek medical help if you believe that you are suffering from a mental illness or are a threat to yourself or others. By using any or all of the information provided, you do so at your own risk. Any application of the material is at the listener's discretion and is his or her sole responsibility.
Hey everybody, Doc Brian here, and welcome to DocX DX, where we talk about the diagnosis of what our guests previously on DocX, which you can find on all streaming platforms, may be dealing with. Now today, our episode with us, we have Sebastian Scales, and hopefully you have checked out his podcast on DocX DX with us. If not, you may be completely lost in just a few minutes. So hopefully you've checked that out. Sebastian, thank you once again for being with us here today. I know that it's not always easy to talk about things that have happened in our life, but it seems like you've done a really good job of trying to incorporate this and get it to where you use it in a way that benefits other people as well. So we appreciate you for doing that. Thank you once again for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So if you had listened to the previous podcast, you know that Sebastian dealt with being molested from the age about 7 to about 10 years old, and by his best friend's father. When Sebastian finally came to a point of where it could happen no more, went to his parents. They went to court. The man was arrested, but then he was not found guilty by virtue of a hung jury. And so Sebastian had to live there in the same town with his best friend's dad, who had molested him over a period of time. Now, Sebastian, you said that you had no mental health diagnosis as from this trauma. Is that right?
Yeah, never had any diagnosis.
Now, did you have to see a therapist before the court trial, or have a therapist that testified in court?
There was nobody who officially was required to do that, though it would have been so helpful to have a therapist that understands these topics explain to the jury what might be going on in my head. Or just like the logistics of how child molestation works. There wasn't any of that. I did see a therapist briefly after the trial, but it wasn't like court mandated or anything. My parents were just like, well, we should probably do this. Unfortunately, the therapist that they recommended, who was apparently a child molestation specialist, was clearly had never worked with kids before. I remember it was one of the first times that we had met. We would play Uno. That was the sort of intro game that we would play. You know, from the last episode, if you remember, I have a history with games.
I was just about to say that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
How that works.
Couldn't we phrase it a different way? Yeah. So we started playing Uno, and I just remember her being like, all right, like the color is now yellow. By the way, what was your least favorite part about getting molested? And I was like, okay, well, I mean, haven't had a chance.
All of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Barbara. It's super.
Or you say, joke's on you, reverse card.
Yes, exactly. Can I Uno reverse this fucking conversation, Barbara? Like, it's outrageous that you think that's an okay thing to ask a 10-year-old. So I just couldn't believe it. And I was like, this is just, and in retrospect, I think what would have really been helpful at that time, because I've had therapists reach out to me who have heard this story and say, well, what would you have wanted to have happen at that point? And I think it would have been so helpful to just have a place where I could not talk about molestation. My entire life up until that point for the last 3 years had been all about this stuff. I had to go through the trauma of getting molested, but also testifying in court was in many cases more traumatic. It's just different. But I think it would have been so helpful to have a place where I could go to where I know I don't have to talk about this when the whole community is talking about it. You know, I come from a small town, so like everybody knew about this. And it's counterintuitive because you want people to be talking about it and trying to heal and stuff. But at that age, I think that would have been the most beneficial thing for me, is just to be able to go to like almost like a safe haven where I can talk. And then I think something would have come up probably organically if I knew that if I could get comfortable and know that I don't have to be talking about it.
Right.
Yeah, it was a pretty awful experience.
Well,
And
it sounds like this therapist was using adolescent play therapy, but it would have probably been more conducive had it been, this is a safe place here with an adult. And if you want to talk about it, we can, but you don't have to.
yeah,
But we're going to play this game. However, your parents paying for that probably would not have been okay with that being the treatment plan. But yeah, I certainly understand where you come from. There are a lot of times where I have clients that come and they say, Doc Brian, I just need to sit on your couch. And I say, I've got work to do. If you just want to sit on my couch for 45 minutes, go for it.
yeah,
And, you know, they'll be sitting there and then all of a sudden they'll just start talking. And organically, the therapy begins to play out. And I find that there is deeper value in that than just sitting here and saying, okay, now let's work through this or let's talk about this or try to redirect. And there's just times that we need to know we have a place that is safe, especially as children coming through. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, we've always said that respect is earned and not given, but trust is given, but mistrust is earned. And especially as kids, we just naturally trust most people. There was a social experiment. I don't know if you saw this or not, but this man would go to a park and he would find these kids' parents and say, what do you think that if I approached your child, that your child would leave the park with me? And they would say, absolutely not. And he said, do you mind if I try? And they was like, well, yeah, because they're not going to leave. Every single child left with this man. Every
yeah,
single child. And we as
yeah,
parents, I as a parent, I'm going to assume that you're not a parent,
yeah.
but I as a parent really would want to believe that my child wouldn't do that. But at the end of the day, it's trust, especially with a child, is given and mistrust is earned. And so as a therapist who may be dealing with a child going through this, we have to understand that mistrust has been earned by all of adults because of this one adult's action. And so we've got to earn back that kind of trust. So
Where were you when I was 10, Doc? I needed you back then. That's right. Couldn't agree more.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
Okay. So I was, when you were 10, I would have been 20. Well, no, I'm 37. What would that be?
20,
I'd be
20
23, 22.
Yeah, 23.
Yeah. I was a police
22,
officer. That's
22.
where I was at. Yeah.
Hey, would have been better than 60-year-old Barbara, you know?
They put you with a 60-year-old?
She was at least 60. Something I don't know what she was, but yeah, clearly wasn't a therapist.
But it wasn't the grandma vibe.
It was the grandma vibe. It was a big time grandma vibe. It was a grandma who had clearly never interacted with her grandkids before. But yeah, it was nuts.
I do know a therapist here that works with adolescents that has no maternal instinct. Like her children, her adult children are like, she's the biggest narcissist. Like, look up narcissist in the dictionary and you will see her face beside it. And
Yeah.
I've had some interaction with her, and I would agree with that observation. So yeah, there are those therapists. So what was that like? That having to go through that therapy.
Well, I felt like at that point I was kind of numb to discussing it. Like after having talked about it in court, it was like we weren't talking about anything new. And I just was so tired of talking about it. And so I felt like I never opened up to her. And I would just get like clearly like visibly bothered. Like I would just not respond to any of the sort of prying that she was trying to do just because I was so resistant to the way that she approached it. And so it was like massively ineffective. And I only went to her for maybe like 5 sessions before I just told my parents. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I appreciate the thought. I know what you guys are doing, but this is not it for me. So I did end up going to therapy. We didn't really talk about it basically at all after that until I started doing stand-up. And then after I've been doing stand-up for about 6 months, the company that I was working for at the time offered some free therapy sessions. And I went to this therapist in New York who and at that point, I've been doing stand-up about it for a while. I'm like an open book about this stuff. So I went into the first session. I was like, all right, here's what happened to me. Like, here's, just laid it all out. And then like, can you help? Do I need help? And she just couldn't get past the fact that an adult would do this to a child. Like, she just kept being like, oh my God, if somebody did that to my kid, like I would put their balls in acid. Like, that's what she just kept saying. And I was like, okay, like, I mean, I get it. Like, definitely don't want these people to just, walk off, get off scot-free. But like, what are we doing here? Like, she couldn't, it was weird. Like, she just couldn't fathom it. And I was like, do you not know that this stuff happens? Like, I'm here, now, like, can you help me with something? I mean, I don't even know. And she ended up telling me, I went to her for 2 sessions. And on the second session, she was like, you don't need to be here. Like, your stand-up is doing more for you right now than I could do. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, not very helpful, but, okay, I'll keep doing it.
I do think that it would be worth mentioning at this point, though, that you really do have to find a therapist that you connect with. I mean, just because somebody has a license to do therapy does not mean that they're the best fit for you. What happens, though, which is particularly hard for therapists, is that we kind of realize that before the client does. And it's very hard to tell a client, especially in your case, who has gone through this significant trauma, to say, Sebastian, I might not just be the fit for you. Because then you feel like you have failed again. But in what we say is that I think that there are other people who may have a better specialty and understanding with the trauma that you have. And I think that they could help you better than I can. However, I'm here for you if you want me to continue therapy with you. If not, I can continue therapy until you can get in to see this other person, which then I would recommend a person. I wouldn't just say, hey, go find somebody else. I guess you could say, fired some clients because I did marriage counseling. Marriage counseling is very interesting because either the wife is agreeing with everything you say or the husband is agreeing with everything you say. Not hardly ever do the husband and wife just team up against the therapist.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, I had that happen. The husband and the wife started both cussing me during the session. And I was like, bruh, like, for real? What is going on here? I know that I'm right. And he wanted a divorce. She didn't want a divorce. And she thought I should talk him out of it. And he thought I should talk her into it. And I'm like, it's not my job. It's not my job to talk either. I'm here to help you to experience whatever it is that you need to experience and get off, all of this stuff. And so I do think it's important to say, hey, look, not just because somebody is a therapist doesn't mean that they're the therapist that you should go to. And I kind of explain it this way. When you go to a new restaurant, you decide, do I like this or not? And sometimes it is very evident, no, I do not like this place. I'm not going back. Or you may go back again and try something different. And it's the same way when you're looking for a therapist. You may need to go 2 or 3 sessions and then say, hey, this really isn't working for me. And as a therapist, we get that. We understand that. We're not hurt by that. And so that really is important. But as you're
maybe you saved the marriage though. Who knows? Maybe unintentionally might have been the perfect therapy for him.
Well, see, here's the thing. They bought a new house and he knew he was going to divorce her, but he waited until they bought in the new house to have more marital equity so that he wouldn't come out in the hole. And like he told me this whole plan. I mean, and she screwed it up. I mean, she screwed it all up. And so then he was like, I'm going to come out with all this debt and da-da-da-da-da. And I was just like, dude, this is what happens when you try to make this plan to screw somebody over. It's going to end up screwing you over in the long run.
Yeah.
But we're not here to talk about them. We're here to talk about you. So it is, but it is true that probably that therapist was right, that you were dealing with this and coping with this much better by way of comedy than what therapy could offer. The question would have been, though, is what happens if this comedy career suddenly ends and you no longer have that outlet?
That's been sort of what happened with COVID in some ways. The live aspect of comedy has been on hold. But what I kind of realized is that it wasn't I don't think it's so much comedy. I mean, obviously that's a huge part of it. Laughing about these things makes you feel sort of invincible with them. It feels like you're taking the power back. But at the same time, I think it's just more so just talking about it in any capacity, really. Fortunately with comedy, you get to get up there for 5 minutes and people can't, I guess they could leave, but you basically get them locked in and they have to listen to you. So it's sort of like therapy.
Who's going to get up and
regard.
leave a comedy routine where this comic is pouring out his heart about being molested as a child? Like there's almost a certain conviction that you're going to have to, well, I have to stay here. I mean, I don't want to be the jerk that leaves while this guy's pouring out his heart.
Of course.
Yeah.
But that was sort of what I realized through quarantine is that I feel similar feelings making TikToks about molestation that I do doing stand-up about it. So I think it's just having the conversations, and each conversation you just feel more comfortable doing it. And I feel like over time, it just gets to the point where it's just another conversation to have. And it no longer is this thing that really burdens you when you bring it up. And comedy just happens to be a way that I think can kind of expedite that process. There's a quote from Wayne Dyer who says, like, it's impossible to be afraid and laugh at the same time. So when you're laughing about this thing that has always made you afraid and uncomfortable and angry and scared, all these other emotions, all of a sudden you're laughing at it and you're like, oh my God, like this is a super freeing feeling. So yeah, I was very fortunate to have discovered that pretty early in life. And but I'm not opposed to therapy by any means. I definitely would be open to the idea of going back and trying to find a therapist that would work out, not even necessarily just for molestation, but like all things in life. I think it could definitely be helpful.
Yeah, and I say, and I don't say this because I'm a therapist, but I do think, we have annual physicals with our doctor to have, well, you're supposed to have an annual physical with your doctor to check levels and as a preventative to other disease or illness. But I do think that it's a good idea for us to just have a mental health checkup every year. But things could be happening that we just don't even realize that are happening. But there's still such a stigma around mental health that that happens. I have had a lot of actors, writers, comics on my podcast, and I'm sure as you are aware that comedians are inherently depressed chronically. And their projection of comedy is their medicine that helps them to cope. Especially, starting out as a comedian, you could have a show and then not have another show for 3 weeks, a month. And now with COVID and quarantine, you may not have a show for months. Or, and I can speak to this as a therapist, it's not the same doing therapy by telemed. I don't think that therapy is as good by telemed because, one, they're not always in a place where they feel like they can speak freely because there might be family in another room. They're not always in the lag time between, because you can't do telemedicine by Zoom. You have to use an actual software because of HIPAA. You can't, somebody just can't show up in your Zoom. And so there's a little bit of a lag time there based on somebody's internet connection. And so I could imagine that it would be the same way doing a show that's not live and in person.
Yeah, Zoom comedy is the worst because you don't know if you're bombing or if you're just lagging, right? And you already have to allot time to allow people to laugh. So if people aren't laughing and you're trying to figure out, is this joke bad or is my Wi-Fi shitty? So it's like it compounds the bomb in many ways.
I was on a podcast with a comedian. His name was Jason Salmon, just like the fish, salmon. And it's called Jason's Failed Podcast. And it really did fail because the Zoom connection lost like 30 times with him. And, but we made a joke about it because it is the failed podcast. But prior to that podcast, he did a comedy bit for nursing home patients by telephone. And he was like, they have me on speakerphone and they're all in this room. And I'm going, that just does not sound appealing at all. Like, I would not want to do that. And he was like, $150, $150, got to do what I got to do. And I was like, man, I just, I couldn't imagine, especially if that is your coping mechanism
Yeah.
to get rid of whatever may be going on in your life.
It's also like about 30 million TikTok views to make that kind of money. So it's probably not a bad call.
Yeah, not a bad call. Someone in your situation where there was trauma over an extended period of time, there are certain stressors that would come into play. And the very first thing we would think about would be post-traumatic stress disorder. Within PTSD, there's another subtype of complex PTSD, or also known as CPTSD, where the C is little and then PTSD is capitalized. And basically, the difference is that CPTSD is a stressor or trauma that happened over a period of time. That stressor or trauma has caused multiple mental diagnosis, whether it be depression, along with anxiety, panic attacks, those sort of things that has all come together. Did you at any point? I'll tell it this. I have a really good friend. I told you I was a police officer. My partner and I were in a line of duty accident where my partner was killed, and I was shot. I had to take the man's life. Had PTSD from that for years. Well, you still have it. You don't ever get rid of it, but you learn to cope and move through it. And so I'm a very, I don't say touchy feely, but if I tell you I love you, I'm going to touch you when I tell you that I love you.
Yeah.
And it's very easy for me to say, hey man, I love you, because this could be the last time I ever talked to you before. And I want you to know that you're loved and that you're valued and you're important and you're needed and you're wanted and all of those kind of things. And so one of the first times we met in church, and we had this really good conversation, and he'd come by my office, not as a client, but just, wanting to talk. I said, and I touched him on his shoulder. And when I touched him, he just jerked away and backed up. I was like, well, that's weird. And I said, I just want you to know that I love you. And he said, and I quote, he said, stop that bullshit with me. I'm not gay. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa. Well, over time, what I found was that he had been raped by his stepfather from the time he was 8 years old to like 14 years old, like full on anal rape. And so any male touching him, any male affection was a trigger for him.
Yeah.
And did you ever, while yours was just a touching molestation, did you ever have any time where if anybody touched you for any reason that you kind of pulled away or even went back to that mind space of that trauma?
I think and this is probably part of why I'm able to do stand-up about it, or why I was initially, I think that because I didn't experience as severe molestation in terms of the spectrum of things that can happen to you, I don't think that I don't recall any experiences like that where it put me in like a flashback mentality and made me think about the molestation, because it was never painful. It was never scary. I think it was just sort of, in many ways, it was like it's kind of a peaceful molestation, it wasn't like, it's not that it's less traumatic, but I think that it affects you differently. And so honestly, from the moment that I spoke up, I did feel fairly free from it. I do think that it's probably a product of it just not being super severe. And it's not diminishing, anybody who's been through something similar at all. These things affect everybody differently. But I never had experiences like that, whether it was affection towards me or when I did become sexually active later in life. I don't have triggers that happen to me during sex or things that are related. If people touch my dick in the same way that this guy did, it doesn't really bring back any sort of memories. In that way, I'm very lucky, I guess. But I don't know, honestly. I just can't think of any particular instances like that. I have dealt with depression and anxiety later in life. It was actually when I moved out to LA after living in New York. I'd been doing stand-up for a year, and I quit my corporate job and moved out and was living with my grandfather. And he just, he was sick. He had cancer, and I got to spend the last year of his life with him. And when he passed away, I just sort of fell into this depressive episode where, I would just, I felt like I couldn't make decisions. Like small decisions became like these absolutely impossible things to make up my mind about. And I was sleeping just so much of the time. And I just felt like pretty debilitating. Like I just became very emotional, and it affected me, honestly, what felt like way more significantly than any of the molestation. I had never really had somebody very close to me die. I mean, my roommate died basically. So it was like, I just hadn't had that experience, and I didn't really know how to cope with it. And funnily enough, that was actually when I ended up going on the meditation retreat. And after about 6 months of dealing with that, it was a couple of months after he passed, that's when I sort of really started feeling these emotions. I've been meditating like most of my life, actually. Even when I was getting molested, my dad has been meditating a long time, and he got me into it very early, but I wasn't taking it very seriously until around that time when I started going on these meditation retreats, which was basically just a 10-day silent retreat where you're meditating between 4 and 12 hours a day. And it really pulled me out of that mindset of what felt like just excessive negative thoughts. Really just compound every thought. Like I would wake up in the morning and the first thing I would think about is just inadequacy, which is a weird thing to be triggered from death of a loved one. But at the same time, it's just how I felt. And going on these meditation retreats, it felt like it gave me a different outlook on these thoughts and the reality of them, which is that it's not who we are. We're this being that's able to operate completely independently of the thoughts that are coming into our head all the time. And it allowed me to disassociate from them and actually like embrace them and acknowledge when a negative thought pops into my head, like I have the complete ability to let that go. And I don't know, it really did sort of change my outlook on it, and sort of pulled me out of that repetition of negative thoughts that I think was causing the depression and anxiety. Ever since then, I've been meditating about just over an hour a day for, probably over a year and a half now. It really has made all the difference in term. And I'm sure there are all sorts of things that can work for anxiety and depression, but for me personally, it really did help immensely. And it got to the point where I, traditionally channeled it into comedy. Eventually, I do a lot of material on my grandpa and what that experience was like for me and stuff. So yeah, man, it was a pretty wild experience, but I'm trying to think of how I got here. You were asking me about PTSD from touching from the molestation, and I just completely transitioned.
Well, that's fine. I wonder though, have you ever heard the term delayed trauma experience?
No, but I can definitely infer what it would be, and it's very possible that that is what set off the delayed molestation trauma.
Right. So, especially at young age, we can kind of package our trauma away and forget certain details about it. But then when another traumatic life event takes place, such as the passing of your grandfather, you project those former things that you have not dealt with, but your psyche or your subconscious want to believe that it's actually due to the current trauma. If I were your therapist over, a couple of sessions, I could figure out if that's what is going on here. I can only assume at this point, but because you said of the feeling of inadequacy, leads me to think that it would be that way because you probably never felt like you were inadequate with your grandfather.
Yeah, not at all. You're totally right. It's triggering other emotions that are quite unrelated to him dying. Yeah, you're nice.
Yeah. So, within that could be a conception of complex PTSD. How we deal with those things is absolute meditation can be a coping mechanism just as much as going through therapy and unpacking it. You said you found it compelling to just be able to stand on stage and talk about it, and make jokes of it. Well, all therapy really is talking about it, and having it from somebody else's viewpoint as to what you're saying and trying to help you to process that emotion. Because 90%, in my opinion, 90% of any any mental health is just processing the emotion healthy, in a healthy nature. And so we have these things that take place, and we can't process that emotion, even within, the spectrum of bipolar disorder. It's all about processing the emotion. Well, in bipolar, it's your brain chemicals not allowing you to. So you have to manually, if you will, process those emotions by using, serotonin meds or other antidepressants to kind of give you a level there so that you can go into therapy and learn coping mechanisms. And so you mentioned that you slept a lot. Did you sleep more than like 12 hours a day?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay. It's interesting that you slept a lot instead of staying awake a lot, because the delayed trauma response would have been the opposite of what the trauma would have been, of where you were awakened early. So the
Yeah,
response then would be sleeping more, because while your body, your subconscious is telling you that while you were sleeping, you're safe. It was when you
that is
woke up.
fascinating.
When you woke up is when everything went south.
Right.
And that wasn't trying to be funny there either.
No,
But
not at
but
all.
but you can use that. You can use that in your
Yeah,
comedy routine, and that's
yeah,
when it
yeah.
all went south. But
Yeah.
it's interesting in how that the only time that somebody's personality changes is during a major traumatic life event, and we're value processed between the ages of 7 and 14. That's where we learn our intrinsic value. And so all of that would come to fruition at a major traumatic life event, such as the passing of a grandparent. So I do find it interesting that took place. Now, what comfort do you get out of meditation?
You get a lot of comfort in many different ways. I think that the biggest thing is being able to sit with whatever thoughts you have and not feeling like you need them to go away. I think that a lot of my anxiety came from having thoughts and feeling like I just couldn't stop thinking about them. And it's almost like an embracing of whatever emotion you're feeling and an acceptance. And when your perspective changes on thoughts and emotions from feeling like it's something that you really don't want to be experiencing to something that is happening, and you just allow it, like that was the whole thing with the meditation retreat that I was on. The technique is called Vipassana meditation. And it's basically just noticing the impermanence of everything. Every thought, no matter how awful it is, will eventually pass. And your willingness to allow it to be is what determines how long it lasts for. And when you're fighting it and wanting it to not be there, that's what makes your whole experience so awful. It's not that I don't have these thoughts anymore. It's just that my perspective on them is different, and I don't feel the need for them to be out of my experience right away.
And you
And
can control them to some point.
to some point, yes. And also just I think you just catch it earlier and earlier. You catch yourself on mind patterns, like habitual thoughts that you're having over and over again. You catch them more quickly. And eventually, and I still struggle with all of that, of course, but I think the time that it takes you to catch the negative train of thought gets shorter and shorter, to the point where eventually you just don't have them, because you have almost trained yourself to just be aware of it all. And eventually it's like, I've had moments where it feels like there's no thoughts going on, and what exists there is just like a total sense of peace and like alignment with everything, and it really feels good.
And I mean, it's the same way within therapy, is that you learn these coping mechanisms that you kind of can slow down time and really, in that moment, experience the emotions that you're having, whether it be through a grounding technique or through tapping or music therapy or whatever the situation may be that works for you, is to really just stop and to experience that emotion in the moment, because the sooner you deal with that emotion, the sooner it's going to be over.
Yeah.
And I want to say that with any mental health diagnosis, there is no cure. The remission is the best that we could hope for. So even in your case, if you had another major traumatic life event, it could turn your world upside down again. And so we've got to make sure that we understand that just like if we were a diabetic, we would have to take insulin every day. And even if we got our A1C down to where it needed to be, we're still going to have to take insulin. And it's the same way with mental health. We can get to a healthy spot, but it's always going to be there. It's always going to be something that we have to be mindful of and that we are taking care of. I applaud you for being able to do that on your own and through meditation and that sort of thing.
Thank you, man.
Kind of puts me out of a job, but do you, I guess is what I would say. If it works, it works. Meditation.
No, I mean, honestly, even just feeling it, just have this whole experience that this podcast has been alone is like, it's so helpful, I mean, I just think that it is different for everybody, but just because, you have something like meditation that works doesn't mean you can't benefit from other things like therapy. I mean, ideally you just find the balance between all of them and you'll find a sweet spot. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's definitely not bashing any other sort of resources that people use. It's just another alternative that can be really helpful for some people.
Absolutely. Meditation would never work for me because I have severe ADHD and I would not be able to sit there and meditate on any one thing for any period of time because I just constantly have this playlist of emotions go through my brain. And that's another thing that people deal with. People that have traumatic experiences that do have like ADHD or ADD is you're taking a depressant to help with the depression to slow everything down, but then you're taking a stimulant to keep your brain in order so that you can concentrate. And there's a fine balance there. So multiple things, we do have to say, okay, I have to do this for this issue, but I have to do this for that issue. In the same way that if you had hypertension and diabetes, you couldn't just take insulin and control your hypertension. You have to do multiple things to find what works for you. And it certainly seems like you have found what works for you. It sounds like that you're in a healthy spot, and that's great. I'm glad that you are able to look at this in the way that you aren't the victim, you're the survivor.
Yeah, man.
And I think that a lot of times we stay in that victim mentality too long. When people say to me, Doc Brian, I'm not going to live through this. There's just no way I can get through this. I remind them that they have gotten through everything up to this point.
Yeah.
And if they take everything they've been through is a lot worse than what we're facing today. And if you got through all of that alive, you're probably going to get through all of this alive.
It's amazing how little credit we give ourselves.
Absolutely.
And how we can get totally wrapped up in what's happening right now and lose sight of all the amazing things that we have recovered from. And just as you said, the amount of courage and willpower that it took to get to the point that you're at is incredible. And most of us don't really recognize that within ourselves. And I would also say that probably in the same way that people who say, oh, I could never do therapy, maybe need therapy the most, I feel similarly about people who say that they could never do meditation for whatever reason it may be. Oftentimes the people that say that are like, my mind just races too much. It's like, oh, well, you're the perfect candidate because you'll benefit from it tremendously, even, 5 minutes a day or whatever it may be. I think that it just can be beneficial. It's definitely not required to do an hour a day, but I think having some sort of time in your day, and it's also, meditation is not restricted to sitting down with your eyes closed. It can be walking meditation, any time where you're just willing to observe your thoughts and not just be in your head, in your mental sort of constructed reality and out of touch with what's happening around you. I mean, you could just look around at stuff for 5 minutes and that would be meditation, but I would definitely.
Well, then I meditate all the time because
there you go. That's right. Yeah.
Squirrel comes by, I'm meditating on the squirrel and what the squirrel may be doing. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then, there is the opposite end of the spectrum where when I was a police officer where I worked, there's a drawbridge that came into town and it was the main thoroughfare to get into the town. And we would routinely have people to jump off the bridge. I remember one day there was this man out there who was going to jump, and he had chosen to jump very early in the morning. He had traffic backed up miles. So obviously we're not going to let people cross the bridge while we've got a man out there.
Yeah.
And the death rate of jumping off that bridge was like 99.9999%. I mean, it was just a fatal blow. And I remember the last time I was ever allowed to go to a jumping incident, I walked up to the man and used a very child psychologist type of thing. And I said, look, man, you've backed up traffic for the last 2 hours. Either jump or get down. And he jumped. And he survived. And,
oh my God.
And I remember thinking, and you know, it's funny now, but it wasn't funny at the time, thinking, how horrible would it be that you thought you were such a failure in life that you wanted to kill yourself and couldn't even be successful in doing that?
Right. Right.
As I said, I was never allowed to go to another suicide call. And
just do it.
Yeah, just do it. Just get it over with. You know, just it's kind of like the TikTok of where the guy says, "Hey, isn't that your ex-girlfriend up there about to jump?" And they go, "Oh my God, yeah. Hang on just a second." And he says, "Do a backflip."
Yeah, right.
Do a backflip. Yeah. So, but we can, you know, over the period of time of years, get to a point of where we are so depressed that due to trauma that we did not deserve, we get into a negative headspace of where the only way that we can make it stop is to end our life. And I have never counseled with somebody who had attempted suicide that said, I wanted to die.
Mm.
What they have always said to me was, there wasn't any other way that I could make it stop. I can tell you, and I'm sure Sebastian can tell you as well, there are other ways. You just got to hang on, live another day, one day at a time, get help. There is no shame in going to a hospital or going to a friend or going to a doctor and saying, the only way that I think I can make this stop is to kill myself. There is no shame in admitting that. And I actually think you're a stronger person by being able to admit that.
Oh, totally.
In the same way that if you had pedophilic ideologies, for you to go to a doctor and say, or a therapist and say, I have these ideals and these thoughts, and I don't think they're normal, I think you're a bigger person for being able to do that.
Oh, 100%, man. You're a hero. Yeah. I mean, like you're helping people and helping yourself at the same time. You know, there's so many feelings of shame associated with these types of things, whether it's suicide or molestation, whatever you experience. And the reality is when we're going through these things, it feels like you're the only one that knows what it feels like. And that's what I've discovered through TikTok and, you know, doing stand-up, is that not only are there people that know exactly how you feel, but there are an unfathomable number of people that have been through exactly what you went through. I mean, they to a T, you know, and can not only empathize with you, but like provide you with the resources that you need to make yourself better. You should just know that you're not alone in whatever your experience is. And it just comes to you just need to come to terms with like accepting what's happened to you and not feeling like you can't express the experience and talk about the experiences that you've had for whatever reason. Shame is oftentimes the main reason. But I know from my experience, it was something that was the most shameful thing that happened to me. And especially at the time, I felt so much shame around discussing it. And now I can't stop talking about it. So you can definitely get to a point where it not only doesn't hinder you anymore, but can feel like it becomes almost like a superpower, and you can like alleviate your own problems and stress and worries and help other people along the way too.
I'm sure that you've experienced, as I know that I have, when I tell my story, there's always that one person that comes up and says, I've gone through something much like you have, but I wish that I were able to tell it like you tell it. And that to me is one of the most fulfilling moments, to know that my trauma has allowed someone else to know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And has helped them in this moment.
It's the best feeling in the world.
And in a way, in a very sick way, it almost makes us glad that we went through that trauma to be able to help other people. You know,
dude, if I hadn't been molested, I'd still be working my corporate job in New York, hating my life, dude. Yeah, I could totally, like 100%.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
So I'll end this podcast just telling you a quote that I say a lot, and then you can respond to it however this hits you. Whatever happens in life, we need to remember that however we feel, it's okay to feel that way. Just don't unpack and live there.
Yes. And totally, man. And recognizing that however you feel is like, it's okay. You don't have to force yourself to feel differently. And I feel like the first step in healing is acknowledging the authentic feelings that you have. How do you really feel about the experience that you've had, and not feeling like you need to suppress any emotions associated with it. And as you begin to let yourself feel those feelings, it just becomes easier and easier to process what happened to you. And you get to a point, I mean, it's an ongoing thing, you know, I'm still healing. I'm by no means done, but it does get easier. And, you know, I've had people reach out to me who have been like, hey, I had somebody who reached out who was like, I was going to kill myself literally today. And then I saw your TikTok and listened to your podcast, and I'm going to give life another shot now. And I'm like, the fact that you can, and anytime you can just provide, so it doesn't have to be that extreme, right? But just that feeling of healing yourself and seeing other people benefit from the healing that you've done, it's so empowering, and it does feel, like you said, that you're almost glad that you went through it. And it does feel like, you know, purposeful. Feels like you have a meaning, and it's really invaluable. And yeah, man, I think that's a great quote. Who said that?
I did. That's my quote.
Oh, you legend.
That's my quote.
Legend.
Yeah. You can find it in a Psychology Today interview that I did back in like 2009, 10, somewhere in there. So yeah, that's my quote. I do want to end on, I said I was going to end on that note, but I'm not going to. So one of the last TikToks that I saw of yours, where you were walking out of a grocery store, and you have seen the man recently, I guess, within the last couple of days.
Yeah.
You saw the man in the grocery store that had molested you, and you said for the first time you saw him and didn't experience the emotion of fear or anxiety, that it was almost a liberating feeling.
Yeah.
How did that, the cliche therapist line, how did that make you feel?
So I've always run into him at various different things, whether it was the soccer games or, you know, coming on and off the ferry. Again, I'm from Bainbridge Island, close to Seattle. And so we'd see him in the ferry terminal and things like that. And whenever I'd see him, it was always just like, it just made my heart race for various different feelings, for different reasons. And even though I'm at the point now where, like, of course I could, like, you know, beat the shit out of this guy, right? But it still brings you back to the childlike mindset and all these past feelings that you've had. This is the first time I've seen him in years. And it's after having done all of this stand-up about him. And I just felt totally at ease with his existence. I didn't feel like worried that I was going to be affected. I knew that there was nothing that he could do to me now. And it just felt so good to not be harboring any of those feelings anymore. And I don't know, man, it just like felt amazing, basically. And it almost made me look forward to seeing him again in the future.
Do you ever think that you could get to a point to where you would go to him and say, I forgive you for what you did to me?
I think if he'd be willing to come on my podcast, I'd be down to do that. But I think that in all seriousness, I do think that there's a massive amount of value in forgiving your abuser. And it's not for everybody. You know, I've talked to people that are, you know, dedicating their lives to making sure that they suffer. And I completely understand that. But I think for me, in my personal experience, letting go is in many ways the most powerful thing that I can do. I don't think that I need to talk to him in order to feel the way that I've been feeling. I think that it could help, you know, I'm not opposed to it at all. I don't think he would ever want to talk to me about it, especially now that I'm publicly talking about my experience.
I'm sure the statute of limitations has been way exceeded.
It actually hasn't. Apparently it's, I think, either 15 or 20 years. And it's funny you bring that up, because I was thinking about, because we didn't try him civilly, we only tried him criminally.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about if I could find a way to, literally represent myself going back into the courtroom the way with the mentality that I have now, and like the understanding, and almost make it not comedic, but like in a way pointing things out that are just the absurdity of it all, and using it as like an educational thing, and like trying to explain to people like the process and how all of these things work, what you can expect. And then also, I mean, obviously it's a lot easier to get a conviction in civil trials than criminal trials. So you could probably get some money out of it too.
And with him being an attorney, he probably has some money.
He does. Yes, exactly. So it's something I've been thinking about in the back of my mind. It's sort of a far-fetched idea, but yeah, we'll see what happens. We've got about 5 years to figure it out.
Maybe call Dateline 2020 and get them to hook you up with a pro bono attorney.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That'd be great.
Well, Sebastian, once again, thank you for being with us on a podcast on DocTalks and here on DocTalks DX. And I appreciate your willingness to share your story, even though you feel like you share it all the time, that sharing it in this way is quite a vulnerable experience to be able to bring it out in this way. Tell our listeners once again where they could find you.
Yeah, my podcast is called What Happened to You with Sebastian Scales. It's available on all podcasting platforms, and videos are up on YouTube. You can find my YouTube account, TikTok, and Instagram all at Sebastian Scales. So feel free to check me out there. And yeah, thank you so much for having me, Brian. I love the whole environment that you've created here, and it really makes people like myself, your guests, feel like you can be vulnerable, and just I think you have an amazing perspective on all of this kind of stuff, and I learned a lot in both of these recordings with you, and I just really appreciate you having me on, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Yeah, and if you sue the guy, you're definitely coming back for another podcast, and maybe I could reach out to him and see if he wants to tell his side of the story. Because who knows, he could have been molested as a child and felt like it was a natural part of transitioning out of childhood into adolescence or preteen. So
he might have thought he was doing me a favor. Absolutely. You never know.
Well, that is true. We never know, and we probably don't want to know. But anyway, I'm Doc Brian. You can find me at thedocbrian.com on TikTok, Doc_Brian, Instagram, the_Doc_Brian. Of course, there's a link at the bottom of my website for all of my social media at thedocbrian.com. So feel free to follow us on all of our social medias. Be sure to follow Doc Talks on all streaming platforms. We thank you for listening today at DocTalks DX here on Patreon. And be sure to subscribe to everything that we have. Doc Talks is a part of Be Frank Network. You can find all of our podcasts at BeFrankNetwork.com, and I invite you to do that. Have some wonderful podcasts, and I look forward to having you join us next time. Again, thank you for listening, and have a great day. Goodbye.